Okay, so we were doing this letter of this Rabbi Avigdor from Vilna, who is writing to the government, it seems like the Tsar, and basically accusing the chasidim of being Sabbateans, being followers of Shabtai. Very clear. I mean, it's interesting. We have not really seen this. We saw it hinted at in the writings of the Vilna Gaon, but and a few years before this, people involved the government in accusing the Hasidim um, of of um, of treason, basically, I guess, or somehow supporting France. But here, sort of 150 years after Shabtai Tzvi to be, there's a certain audacity in it, and we'll see. It's a very long letter, and he makes up a lot of arguments. But he makes a statement here that Shabtai Tzvi and his followers did not believe in, and it's interesting that he links Shabtai Tzvi to Turkey. There must be a political side to that, I think. That must perk up the Tsar's ears, because of Turkey and Russia. But so here he accuses he says about Shabtai Tzvi that they don't believe that God created the world, and he sort of applies that to the Chassidim. So he says, if the Sabbatians don't believe that God actually created the world, they also don't believe that God watches over the world. And he says, that's ridiculous, because of course God did. And, he sort of makes the jump then from Shabtai Tzvi to the Chassidim, sort of taking for granted that Chassidim are part of the Shabtai Tzvi group. It's interesting. So there's the Don. There were small. There are still probably small groups that follow for Shabtai Tzvi. I mean, and I'm not denying how widespread Shabtai Tzvi was. I mean, even 100 years later, great rabbis are accusing each other of being followers of Shabtai Tzvi. I mean, everyone believed that Shabtai Tzvi was the Messiah. More people believed Shabtai Tzvi was the Messiah than the Lubavitcher Rebbe, than believed the Lubavitcher Rebbe was the Messiah. But this is a lot later, and it's true that, as he said, these are like the secret society. They believe in secret things, and in that sense, maybe there's a link. And it'd be interesting to see his arguments later. I mean, is there really a correlation you can make between the followers of Shabtai Tzvi and Chassidim? We'll see that. So he says, the followers of Shabtai Tzvi didn't believe that. So if this group doesn't believe that, then they're also illegitimate. Let's see. Okay, then he continues. He's sort of making this argument against, how can you believe that? And then a little bit later in the letter, he goes to sort of concrete things. And he says, this can cause damage to other people, other nations, other groups within Russia. And therefore I am, beseeching the impartor to do something about this group. And I guess, what he's trying to do here is stir up fear that this is going to impact, I guess, the Russian Orthodox. And then he kind of goes through all these arguments. He says, karati b'shem zeh mipnei shemchaber shel chibur hamatzuref b'zeh mischabin l'harkik b'nei m'derech l'kim. Says their books, and here really the book he's referring to is the Tzavas Harivash, the Baal Shem Tov's ethical will. And he says, I'll quote from it. Tzavas Yisrael mi Mezhebish, the will of Israel of Mezhebish. Israel Mezhebish is Baal Shem Tov. The Torah Emes, and the book called Torah Emes, which is from the Maggid of Mezrich. Shall Beryl mi Mezrich. I guess Rabbi Dov Ber. The Sefer Ba'amud 21, Katav Ben Ashar. So he says on page 21 of this book of the ethical will of the Baal Shem Tov, it says, Adam chayav lios aliz v'sameach. A person is obligated to be joyous. To believe without doubt that the kindness of God dwells upon a person and covers him. That God sees the person and the person can, I guess, perceive God. So what's he referring to? So he's here in the note that he's referring to the following words in the ethical will of the Baal Shem Tov. The atamid b'simcha, that you should always be joyous. Should believe with complete belief that the Shekhinah, divine presence, is with you and guards you. And that when you look at things, you're looking at God. See, it's not that he's saying you see God. He's saying when you look at the world, you're seeing God, and that God looks at you. That's what's written in the ethical will. And so here, this is obviously translated from the Russian, from Yiddish to Russian, the Russian back to Hebrew. That's what we have. And so here's his argument. He's saying these three things are written in the book of the Chasidim. Divreim Harishonim. This idea that you should always be joyous, it stops them from studying the holy books. He's saying, this is like a crazy argument. He's saying they basically disagree with Judaism by thinking you have to be happy. And they're not going to study the Bible. Why? Because it says in Kohelet, in the book of Ecclesiastes, the heart of the wise is found in the house of mourning, of the mourner. And the heart of the fool is found in the house of feasting, of joy. It also says in the Torah that you'll get the curses because you didn't serve God with joy, right? See, you could quote a million things from the Torah. But here, saying the Chasidim believe you should be joyous. They obviously are going against the Torah because there's a pasuk in Kohelet that says the heart of the wise is in the house of the mourner. Now, of course, he's speaking to a, he can say whatever he wants. Who's he? He's arguing to the Tsar, who, what does the Tsar know? Probably about Jewish theology. He's saying it's true that the Jews can be joyous when they have the temple. And in fact, they're commanded in the book of Deuteronomy, you should be joyous before the Lord your God and on your festivals 3 times a year. They give Jerusalem joy from Yeshayahu. But from this, you understand that that's only at the time of the Messiah. Right now, we're not supposed to be happy, or we're not obligated to be happy. And even at the time of praying to God, you're not supposed to be so joyous, because it says in Tehillim, serve God with fear and trembling. And we find that we're supposed to tremble before God in the holy books. So we see that this group, the Chasidim, that are joyous, and they're always trying to be happy. It must be. Why would this be? The answer is they're followers of Shabtai Tzvi. So it's interesting, right? In other words, this claim, this criticism of the joy of the Chassidim does go all the way back, right? In other words, even 25 years before this, in the first criticisms of going against the Chassidim, you do have the criticism of, oh, they're always happy even when they sin. And now that doesn't seem to be such a big sin, to be happy. But here, I mean, this claim that the stress on joy it means you're a follower of Shabbat Tzvi. That's pretty wild. And when they get together, they don't do anything else. What do? All they do is eat and drink. Zem orim oso la'alitzut miuchedet. Shebezratah himakaimim beneim agudas seter shechom ligrom l'chut v'ziter v'mais rasha. And that causes them to do wicked things, all this happiness and eating and drinking, and sounds like secret Kabbalistic things. Now, had he claimed before that the followers of Shabbat Tzvi are always joyous? I don't think so. But that wasn't the criteria of the followers of Shabbat Tzvi. But it's interesting that his angle here, right? He's going to the government. So what's your angle going to be? So here it's that they're part of a seditious society. Shabbat Tzvi. Okay, let's see the second thing he writes here. All right, okay. Skip one. Oh, here, I did this. Okay. Number two. So, right, his second complaint against them was that God, they write in the will of the Baal Shem Tov that the kindness of God is always there with you. God's presence is always there with you. So he says, B'dvarim b'siman hasheni heim rotzim lomar she'ein la'adam l'fachad mipnei af nitziv. He says, if you believe that God is always with you, you're not going to be afraid of anybody. And they're saying that God is always with everyone. He says, well, we find the opposite thing in the Torah. Because God says to Jacob, I will always be with you. Yaakov was afraid. Amnam, he was afraid of Laban. He was afraid of things that were going to happen to him. Now, it's true, he says, that you should always ask God to be with you. But that doesn't mean you can conclude that God is always with you. It's wild. And number three, you had his third complaint in this first part was that God sees us and that we perceive God. But although the original language of the Rivash of the Baal Shem Tov was, that you are looking at God. In other words, by looking at the world, I think. And he says this idea that you're always looking at God, he says this goes against what we know. God is not a body, right? Of course, Maimonides says that. And God has no form. And we can't see God. Nobody can see God. Even Moshe prayed to God, show me your glory. And God couldn't. God says to him, nobody could see my face and lip. So we see that these wicked people, these chasidim, they're liars. They say that they see God, but that's impossible. And they're acting as if God has a form. In this sense, they're going against the Torah of Moses. Asher kol umas olam aminim bo, which everybody believes in, right? Even the Greek, even the Russian Orthodox are going to believe in the Hebrew Bible, and the Hebrew Bible itself says Moses couldn't see God. So what does the Baal Shem Tov mean that, then the how could the Baal Shem Tov say you see God? And this is going against, right? It's interesting how he phrased it. Their conclusions go against all the nations, right? They're it's not just right. What does the Tsar? Does the Tsar really care about Jewish theology? But I think we can see subtly that he's trying to argue that this is a dangerous group that's going to impact everybody. I mean, the arguments are just so kind of outlandish, and that it's amazing. And of course, it ends up. I mean, it's interesting, by the way. What happens historically is that the Tsar appoints somebody to look into this. The person looks into it and says, "This is ridiculous," but then Rabbi Shneur Zalman ends up in jail anyway. That's what's interesting. In other words, it's not the theology that puts him in jail; it's the politics, of course. Something happens. It's a little bit unclear what happened. There was a guy though who was in charge of the area of Vilna, I think, and he was able to have to check, but some people write about this. Why do Rabbi Shneur Zalman end up in jail a second time? It wasn't really because of this letter. This letter does not end up getting accepted by the authorities. They see through it, but he does end up in jail. He says the chasidim write that God is manifest in the world, that God is mislabesh be'etzem, that God is clothed in the world. So here's the quote from the Baal Shem Tov: if you see something that you have fear from, Yomar, you should say, Ma yesh lira midavar. Why should I be afraid of this? Hello, Adam Kamoti. That person is a human being like me. Mikosh came with behema, certainly before a wild animal. God is clothed in this person or animal or thing. Kama yesh lo lira min ba'atzmo. I should be afraid of God. That's what the Baal Shem Tov says. But you shouldn't be afraid of people or animals because it's really God. But God you should be afraid of. Okay, so he says, here's the argument against this. Divrayim, this idea that Chassidim say you shouldn't be afraid of people. Woe is to the person who thinks that people are not people and that they're, God. We see in Devarim, we just read this, put a king upon yourself. In fact, you are supposed to be afraid of other people. You're supposed to have fear, awe of a king. It says in the book of Shmuel, Malo karnecha shemen b'lecha shlach leYishai, go to Yishai, who was David's father. Because I see that he has a son, David, who will be the king. And Shmuel says, how can I go? Shaul will hear that I'm going to appoint David king and he'll kill me. So God said to him, take a sacrifice with you to sacrifice to God. So this, you see that you have to be trembling before a king. Even though Shmuel had an obligation to listen to God and to go coronate David, but he was still afraid of Saul, the king. So we see that this group of chasidim is wrong. Their idea that you shouldn't be afraid of anybody is not true. You have to be afraid of the king. Now, it's interesting, right, that's his argument. He's arguing to the Tsar. Right. So, and it's again, within this, you can also see what he's trying to say. He's trying to say, these people are not afraid of you, Tsar. These people are, this is a whole different, ball of wax. And these people, not only are they seditious and a hidden society and have secrets, but they're not afraid to be king, right? That's how he sort of twists. It's amazing. You can see that there's a political side to this is not just purely theological. He wouldn't be going to the czar with it. But he's really he's grasping, at straws and sort of making these arguments, but he's definitely aiming to undermine the chasidim. That's interesting. Okay, we'll see you tomorrow.
Okay, thank you.
Bye. Yeah.